And I'm going to ask you about one of them tonight.
I can tell you about Relics. I remember.
Yeah. Let me start recording here. Yes.
I'm going to tell my phone to be quiet.
Okay. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the show. This is Star Trek All Access, and we are continuing our look at the TOS character crossovers. This week, we are reviewing Relics, which was written by Brendan Braga and Renee Echevarria, directed by Alexander Singer, and it originally aired on October 10th, 1992. The IMDb description is that the Enterprise stumbles upon a Dyson sphere with a ship crashed on the outer surface. An away team finds some systems still powered up, and the chief engineer from the old Enterprise, Montgomery Scott, is locked in the transporter cycle. Joining me tonight in the historic Cosmic Potato Studio, we have Rick. How's it going, sir?
You don't stumble across a hunk of metal the size of a solar system. But otherwise, I'm fine.
Scott's going to be joining us, he says, in about 60 seconds. So we'll be waiting for that call. But we also have a special guest here. He is the prolific writer of many Star Trek novels, as well as a ton of other novels, television scripts, and comics. Mr. Michael Jan Friedman, how's it going, sir?
It's going pretty well. Thanks, Sean.
Now, I asked Mike to be here tonight because he was tasked back in the day to write the novelization of this episode. Mm-hmm. So I thought it'd be fun. I thought he would have some interesting insight into the story, because I'm sure you've probably experienced the story of this episode more than any of the rest of us anyway.
I think that's probably true.
I'm adding John. John is being added to the stream now. John's here. How's it going, sir?
It goes well.
No, you sound fine. All right. So,
which of your children did you swipe the headphones from?
This would be my son. The daughter's was hot pink. So I don't know if you can see. It's Avengers in the house.
I get a pair of those.
Before we dig into the plot of the episode, let's just kind of give an overall synopsis of our thoughts on what the whether or not we liked the episode or what we did or didn't like about it. Mike, you're our guest tonight. What do you think of Relics overall as an episode?
I thought it was great. And I'm not just saying that because I adapted it as a novel. I really think it was a great episode. They put a lot of thought into it, and Scotty's arc was legit and moving, and I thought it was a terrific episode. I mean, I have just for the record, I have adapted screen entities that were terrible. So if it was, I would say so. But no, I thought it was great.
I bet that would probably be hard. You've got to take material that you really don't like, and you've got to adapt it in a way into something that you are at least proud of. And Scott just joined the call too. Scott, how's it going?
It's going well. Sorry, I don't know what happened there.
No, it's fine. It's fine. It's fine.
We're ready.
Rick, what do you think of this episode?
I love it, but not as much as I used to. When it first came out, I was all over it, and especially the scene on the holodeck, because I think the memory blurs after a while, but I think this was the first time we had seen a Constitution class anything redone since since the original series.
Other than the movies, I guess. Yeah, other than the motion picture, yeah.
But that wasn't the original Constitution.
Right.
Class.
Yeah,
this was the first time that they rebuilt parts of the bridge. I know some of it was composited, but they because I remember reading stories about how much detail, how accurate they were trying to be, and trying to find the gumdrop buttons and all of that stuff. It's just over the years, I've just, maybe it's just one of those things where you really shouldn't keep watching something over and over and over again, because it's probably second only to Best of Both Worlds. Well, Best of Both Worlds, All Good Things in this one are like the 3 TNG episodes I've watched a million times.
Yeah.
And the way that both Geordi and Scotty behave in this episode, it doesn't always ring true to me, because somewhere around Star Trek V, someone decided that Scotty should be comic relief and kind of be a bumbling, and you know, like the you know, they took that one joke about why do you think they call me a miracle worker and just turned it into his entire story, is that he makes up everything and none of it's, you know, and it's just, I think it's a great episode production wise, and I still enjoy watching it. And it's who doesn't tear up at the end when they give him the Volkswagen to go off and fly into space, and Volkswagen. Here's the smallest shuttle we've got. So I do love the episode, but I recognize that there are some parts of it that I don't totally dig.
He did pick up a computer mouse in Star Trek 4 and try and talk into it.
Yeah.
Hello, computer.
My problem with that scene was less him trying to talk into the mouse and more him actually knowing how to use the keyboard.
Yeah. John, what about you? What do you think about Relics?
It was good. It was good. It was good. I enjoyed it. I hadn't seen... Honestly, I haven't seen a lot of TNG since they...
Somebody have a racetrack outside their house.
Yeah. You may have noticed a different... this is a very bootleg production from the Irons household here tonight. So... so I've got my swanky Avengers headphones, and I'm recording in the living room as opposed to my usual podcast hidey hole bat cave, because that room has the best internet connection and everyone else is watching a family movie that they would normally stream upstairs, but streaming is bad upstairs tonight, apparently. So I was like, that's fine, we'll switch, I'll record upstairs. And no, I couldn't even get a signal. So yeah, there's a racetrack outside, and I thought the episode was good.
Okay. Scott, what are your thoughts?
I'll just mute.
I think it's always a wonderful day when you get the first motorcycle friendly weather outside, because you get that wonderful sound. I've always loved the episode. The things that I don't like about it are like small detail aspects, and they are, and have always been since it originally aired, have been overshadowed by all the wonderful aspects of the episode, mainly in the forms of Scotty interacting with the individual members of the cast. His interactions with Data and 10 Forward, that's delightful. It's a lot of fun. We get to see, Scotty know more than anyone else about real booze, because all these youngins don't know how booze works or how it should work. The scene on the holodeck, like Rick said, is fantastic. To hear Scotty and Picard, actually, to hear them actually connect is one part of why it's so great. The other reason I love that scene so much is Picard is the first person on the crew that Scotty has talked to so far in that episode that really has taken the time and can understand what it must be like for him. He's not openly impatient with him or finding it odd that he doesn't understand how this century works. He's taking the moment to sit down and say, what do you think of this ship? Because he knows, this is the way I interpreted it. Picard knows that by asking Scotty to talk about how he feels about this new Enterprise compared to the one that that he knew for so many years. That's how you get to know the man. It's not, what do you think? We got a bar right on the ship. What do you think of that? No, it's what do you think of the ship itself? Because that's what Scotty connects with the most. And that's how he was able to open up, by connecting the Enterprise D to his ship. I didn't always love how Geordi was interacting with Scotty. I thought it was odd for Geordi, who was always such a friendly guy, to be that short with someone, especially a fellow engineer. But in the context of the story, it still works well enough that I can go with it. The aspect of the Dyson sphere being brought into it, I always thought that was a fascinating concept, and I love seeing a great sci-fi concept mixed in with this great character concept that we had in the episode. So very nearly everything worked for me really, really well. This is an episode where if I put it on a shuffle and it happens to come up, there's no way I'm turning it off.
Yeah, I think this is one of the many times that Star Trek could have royally screwed up, but they ended up knocking it out of the park. Because there's a lot of times that TV shows do this kind of stunt casting, bringing in a character that they've known from another show, doing crossovers and things like that. They're bringing back this character from the original series, which they had already done a couple of times before, but this is the first time that you have to find a way to get the character there. Because when McCoy was there, he was still alive. He was just old. And then Spock and Sarek are Vulcans, so they have a long lifespan. It makes sense for them to still be alive. But this time you had to find a way to get him there. And it's not necessarily time travel. It's it's one of the Star Trekky things that they do a lot. They use the transporter, but
Transporters are magic.
Yeah, they are. But it very easily could have turned into something kind of hokey and corny, but it actually turned into one of my favorite episodes. The only problem that I have with it, and I'll get into it in a few minutes, is I think Geordi has an attitude problem. Other than that, it's a good episode.
I think if they were to try to make this episode today, I get the feeling that it would be so loaded down with obvious heavy-handed moments of fan service, or what, for example, Screen Rant would refer to as Easter eggs, even though they're not Easter eggs, they're just references. And I know, Rick, you love that. It would be filled with so many so-called Easter eggs, they wouldn't be able to get to the story, because they'd be spending all their time turning to the audience, winking and saying, hey, you remember this? Which they didn't really do in this episode. There were small moments, like with Data not being able to name the drink and just having to eventually chalk it up to, it is green, which if I remember correctly is a reference to TOS, which when I was a kid, I didn't know it
by any other name from
the
episode. By any other name.
And I didn't realize it was a reference when I first saw the episode. And as I grew up, I realized that made that moment better. But even without the context, it was still a great moment. That's the sort of thing we get in this episode. Nowadays, it would be painted so obviously that anyone would know. And I think that distracts from the plot if you spend too much time focusing on that.
Mike, now at the time that you were tasked to write this book, you'd already written several Star Trek novels. How did that job fall in your lap? You wrote this book in like a month, right?
Oh, less.
That's what the forward said anyway in the book.
It was probably for an adaptation, it was kind of leisurely. I think it was 3 weeks.
Oh,
it was harder. It was harder than other adaptations, because typically you're adapting a movie. All you have to do is transcribe it, and that's 120 pages right there, or a 2-part episode, like All Good Things. But in this case, it was a single episode. So you really had to come up with a lot more original material and interstitial material than you would normally. But I'd done a lot of other Next Generation work, and they trusted me, and they said, Mike, so are you interested in doing the Scotty episode? And I went, oh my God, yes. I'd actually gone bar hopping with Jimmy Doohan and a couple other guys in Toronto one night. So I knew him a little bit, and it was really an honor and a privilege and a big kick to be able to adapt this episode.
Yeah.
When I did it, the first thing I did, because I had to come up with so much material, the first thing I did is I called Ron Moore, who is a writer of the episode, and I think he might possibly have been a producer at that point. I'm not sure, but in any case, I called him and I said, "What did you leave out that you really wanted to put in?" And he said, "Oh my God, are you kidding? There was actually a scene with Troy in the script that wasn't shot, but it was in the script." So I said, I'm going to use that if that's okay. He said, "Yeah, sure, absolutely." And he started telling me about stuff that he would have put in. So naturally, that was the first material that I put into the book that wasn't in the original episode. And then a big part of it was the Dyson sphere, which we never saw. It was an interesting concept, but we never got to see it. So I said, we're going to have an away team down there on under the Dyson sphere. So that was also a big part of the novelization. But it was great, and I think Ron liked it too, because here was stuff that he had come up with that that was finally going to see an audience. But it was great. It was a great plum assignment.
I read the novel when it came out close. 28 years ago. But I reread it within the last couple of weeks for this episode. And as I was rereading it, I remembered a lot of the stuff that you had added, the whole, Kane's whole storyline, and then the away team to the Dyson sphere and all that. But I tried to look at it as, what things did Michael add himself, and what things were originally in the script that he adapted here that they may have cut out? Because that happens a lot with adaptations. They might give you a script that they're working off of, and stuff gets cut out when they actually film it. But you write stuff that doesn't end up being in the film or in the show or something like that. And that scene with Troy stood out to me. I was like, yeah, that's probably something that they either filmed or was in the script or something like that.
Really in the script. It was definitely in the script.
For you guys that haven't read the book, there's a scene where Scotty goes back to his quarters after Geordi jumps down his throat, and Troy comes to see him, and he kind of deduces that she's a psychologist, and he gets really angry that she thinks he's crazy and all that kind of stuff, So, and it's a good scene. The other thing that stood out to me that I thought was something that you had added, but then I read later that it was actually supposed to be in the show, was that when Scotty goes to the holodeck in the book, he actually conjures up the crew and interacts with them and everything. So that was originally in the script, though, right?
It wasn't. It was not in the script, but it was one of the things that Ron had wanted to do.
Oh, okay.
But couldn't. So that the idea for that scene came from him, but it wasn't originally in the script.
I like that scene because in the book, Scotty goes to the holodeck, and he's got that bottle of green whiskey with him and everything, and he tells the computer to pull up the crew, and Kirk and Spock and Uhura and Chekhov and Sulu all appear, and he starts to talk to him, and the first thing Kirk does when he looks at Scotty is say, Scotty, why is there a bottle of whiskey in your hand?
At the time they were just developing that CGI technology and using it like in Coca-Cola commercials. You saw
Yeah.
the stare and so on. And so Ron's idea was that maybe they could do that with the original crew and have them interact with Scotty, but it just became too expensive.
Yeah. They eventually did do it on Deep Space Nine. They had several scenes in Trials and Tribulations.
Did anyone else think it was strange that he conjured the bridge and not engineering?
I think that the bridge is more of a touchstone for the audience.
Yeah. So
it was easier to build.
Yeah.
I think it's not something that struck me as strange at the time, nor has it really occurred to me much since then, mainly because just, for the reason that Sean just gave.
You want to see the bridge?
The audience thinks of the bridge. That's what we're going to recognize. And while from a character perspective, it might have made more sense for him to recreate engineering, or based on some of the images that we remember the most from the show, a Jeffries tube for him to just fall up into and lay in.
Yeah.
But I can, even just the instant that you brought it up, John, I immediately started to write up some headcanon for it and say, considering how often we saw Scotty on the bridge in episodes of TOS, he seemed, from my shaky recollection after all these years and having watched TOS less than any other series, it seems to me that Scotty worked from the bridge at least as much, if not more, than Geordi.
I'm not saying that it was like so. Like, I wouldn't say it was disruptive,
right?
But especially given the nature of this episode and how he is out of place, it would seem that if he is trying to find the place where he fit, it would have been. I mean, and I think you're right. I agree. It was definitely for the audience, and it was probably a production thing too. But it did strike me that he's like, I can't go home again, but the place where we think of him being, at least where I think of him being, isn't the place that he wanted to go.
Also,
Yeah.
Well, also
initially they were thinking that he'd be interacting with the other.
That's true.
Contemporaries.
Right.
So
That makes sense.
They're natural for that to happen.
Right.
Well, also, I'm kind of the Scotty of my where I work. I'm the technical director of the theater, and so I build the sets. But I also, the first thing I think of, like if I go back to visit one of my places I worked in the past, I don't immediately go to the shop. I go to the stage to see what's going on, what kind of new toys have they got in the control booth, where the stuff actually happens. And then eventually I'll go to the shop and have fond memories or remember things that hurt like hell, blood and pain. So it may have been, if you want some headcanon that, and this is one of the reasons why I'm so precious about Scotty. He's my favorite, he's my favorite character. I love wearing red uniforms. Whenever anyone gives me crap about wearing any of my red Star Trek shirts, I'm like, look, Scotty outlived everybody and he wore a red shirt. Shut up.
Yeah.
Maybe he just started at the bridge and was going to work his way through the ship, but then, the conversation with Picard and he got bummed out and just never got past it.
I want to address a couple of things that come up every time I talk to somebody about this episode. The first thing I want to address is everybody always wants to nitpick that the first thing that Scotty said when he came out of the transporter was that, well, Kirk must have gotten the ship out of mothballs to come and get me himself. And then, he was present when Kirk supposedly died in Star Trek Generations. It's like, that script wasn't written yet.
Well, and also, if I've had to deal with people making this particular bitch before, and he just came out of 75 years in a transporter buffer.
Yeah.
who isn't going to be disoriented at that point? So, people get so hung up on like one little line.
Yeah,
it's like, gee.
One of the easiest lines to explain away with what you just said. He's probably a little bit disoriented. He's a little confused. Consider where he's spent the last 3/4 of a century. And if that's not good enough for people, then they need to understand, like you said, the script for Generations hadn't been written yet. And even when it was written, it wasn't written for him in the first place.
Mm-hmm. Well, besides, my mother's been dead for 12 years. I still reflexively go to call her when I see something. So,
Also, after that night we went bar hopping in Toronto, I think he was a little disoriented after that.
The other thing that I want to address is, like I said at the beginning, that I think Geordi has a bad attitude. Now, we've talked about before that the Enterprise, the original Enterprise, was not really considered the flagship that we think of now. We always think of the Enterprise as being the flagship of the fleet, but the original Enterprise was just one of a bunch of Constitution class ships, and that's the one that we were focusing on. However, Scotty was part of a crew that did a lot of some of the most important missions that the Federation had, especially like the missions involved in the films. Like the stuff that happened in Star Trek 1, the stuff that happened in Star Trek 2. That's the kind of stuff that everybody that goes through Starfleet would probably study that stuff. So you would think that Geordi, being an engineer, would have a little bit of hero worship for Scotty, and he acts like he's never heard of him before. And then he just like gets really annoyed with him pretty quickly into the episode. I mean, it's only like the second act, I think, when he blows up at Scotty like that. So I think that if it had been real life, Geordi would be a little more, oh my God, it's Montgomery Scott. You started everything, that kind of stuff.
For someone who gets so wide-eyed over Zephram Cochrane, you would think that he'd have a little bit more respect for someone, in Starfleet history, almost as notable. You would think that the entire crew of the original Enterprise would be, as almost as notable as him. They're luminaries. They're legendary.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And to have this legendary figure who was also essentially a contemporary, you would think that he'd have a little bit more patience and be able to understand, well, yeah, you're 75 years behind. You're not going to get it. Let me show you some of this and some of that, rather than why don't you get out of the way?
Yeah.
I think there's a little bit of rivalry there. It's easy for Geordi to look at Zephram Cochrane as someone he's not competing with in any way.
Mm-hmm.
Here's this figure from the past, and whether whether he idolizes him or not, he's got to recognize that he's an engineer of some magnitude, some historical magnitude, and maybe there was a little, now you're in my engineering section. It's my engineering section. Don't be tampering with that stuff.
Yeah.
Don't play with my toys.
Well, I got to say, one of the things that really bugged me about the episode, and like what I was saying earlier about how Scotty was portrayed, is no matter how out of it Scotty is, I had a lot of trouble with him going up and just like, pulling out the dilithium crystal rack from an operating engine, and going, oh, hey, look at this. Just, I would know better, if I went to, saw a car that was 200, or 80 years ahead of the car I'm used to, I'm not going to reach in and grab the fan belt while it's running.
Yeah.
So, I mean, yeah, Geordi kind of had a bit of an attitude, but also they had Scotty doing some kind of iffy stuff there too.
Yeah.
He was a little bit of a loose cannon.
Yeah. Mike, can I ask you, were you working from the shooting script, or did you see the final episode before you started working on the book?
I was working from the script.
Mhm.
You know, it takes a while to, obviously it takes a while to print a book. And I don't think I'd ever had the opportunity to see a screen product before I finished writing the adaptation. You're always working from a script of, it might be the final script. It might not even be the final script.
Yeah.
No, I hadn't seen it. They came out about the same time, and the book has, if anything, a longer lead time than the episode.
Mm-hmm. When I was a kid, this was long before VHS and the internet and all this stuff. I had James Blish's adaptations of the original series, and I'm still finding shows that I hadn't seen, but I read a million times, that I hadn't seen more than a couple times. And I'm finding stuff in it that, because back then they did a lot more ad-libbing than was allowed on TNG, I think. So I was just curious if you had to deal with any of the, I have no idea how Blish felt about that. Whether he got frustrated at all or not.
Oh, I don't think so. I mean, he was, he wasn't the originator of the material. He was adapting it. So I'm sure he was pretty. He like me. He knew his place.
Yeah, the check cleared. That's all. That's the important.
And I think he did a brilliant job. Given what he was working with, and how much real estate he had to tell each story. I think he did, a terrific job.
Yeah, and another thing about your novelization that I liked was you had an entire prologue that was basically how Scotty got there, how Scotty got himself into the transporter in the first place. And we see the Jenolan going through the same kind of motions that the Enterprise is going to go through later in the story, where they hail the Dyson sphere and they end up starting to get pulled towards it, except that the Jenolan actually crashes. And you explain that Scotty, he was a passenger. So the fact that him and Franklin were the only ones that survived is because Scotty had come down to the bridge to try and help. So he wasn't in the habitat area when it kind of got depressurized and killed just about everybody.
Right. So, well, again, the script they gave me is probably good if you transcribe it for about 60 pages. So, one of the jobs of an adapter is how can I fill up 180 pages? Oh, I know. I can dramatize what happened, and fill in those details. And you don't want to do anything that's superfluous or anything that's going to just slow down the story. But it seemed to me that would be something exciting and something that would add to the larger story.
The Dyson sphere. Let's talk about the Dyson sphere, because it's an interesting concept for a science fiction TV show. And if you really start to think about it, it's kind of a silly concept, because I mean, there's no way that could be built.
That's not entirely true.
Huge. I mean, you're talking about one structure, the size of the entire rotation of the Earth around the sun.
Actually, it's bigger. I've done a lot of research into Dyson. Well, not specifically into Dyson spheres, but I have done some research that kind of got into it. I mean, yes, the engineering of it is staggering, but fundamentally, it's not impossible. It's just you've got to have some incredible tech to do it.
The one problem is the energy source in the middle of it, would be tricky, because it's got to be balanced. It's got to stay in the middle. It's got to not do anything that's going to jeopardize the life on the inner, we'll call it the inner skin of the Dyson sphere. That's tricky. But I suppose it can be done. The bigger question is why? Why are you doing that? That's a lot of work.
Yeah.
The theory, okay, I'm not sure if I'm going to get the genesis of the idea right. Freeman Dyson came up with this idea that a sufficiently advanced civilization would require so much energy to power all of the things they're doing that they would eventually just decide to encase their star so that they could get the maximum output of it. Because like we get a buttload of energy here on the Earth from the sun, but it's such a tiny fraction of the energy the sun puts out. But like you said, some of the engineering problems are keeping the shell at the proper distance from the star, so it'd have to be able to maneuver, and finding enough material, because it's doubtful even all of the rocky planets and moons in this solar system would be enough material to build the Dyson sphere. There's a lot of different variants on it. There's the Dyson swarm, there's the Dyson cloud, there's the it's not usually a solid sphere like they showed in the show, but usually it's the biggest problem that theoretical scientists who have kind of noodled around with this idea have seen is just getting rid of all of the excess infrared, which is kind of what they feel like that's how you could spot one. There's a star that's been giving astronomers conniptions for the last couple of years called Janet's star, because it's been dimming far more than any star should. And there's you probably saw in the headlines last year, you're like, is this a Dyson sphere? Is this an alien civilization? And they're figuring out it's just clouds of dust in between us and the star. But
Yeah.
That's when the whole idea became much bigger in the news and in the science videos that I watch all the time. And a lot of the people who are way smarter than I am started talking about this stuff, and I just got to sit there and go, yeah, that's cool.
And it's very cool.
Mm-hmm.
In theory, at least it's very cool.
I like the idea, at least as far as the science fiction standpoint, because when the ship first comes inside and you can see the landscape and it's curved, that because it's all on the inside of the sphere with the sun, with the star being in the middle. Just trying to think about what it would be like to be on the surface. You look at the horizon, and there's not really a horizon there, because the landscape that you're looking at would curve up,
right?
Instead of just disappearing.
Right. You'd see, I guess, maybe. I mean, you'd see the curvature, maybe, but then again, maybe not, because it's so much bigger than the Earth.
Right. Yeah.
You might not be able to see far enough to see that. Presumably, it would be pretty clear in there. I guess there'd be weather, but I guess it'd be pretty clear. But even then, it's so big. I think you would tend to see what looks like flatland.
Yeah, because I was actually thinking about this quite a bit this week. Is like, you've got so much surface area inside. You've got way more surface area than the Earth even has. I mean, probably like millions of times more. So you could fit millions of times of our population in this inside the sphere. So it's pretty cool to think about.
It always struck me as almost a missed opportunity. There was a lot of, I thought, story potential that could have been drawn from that to discover this incredibly advanced theoretical scientific innovation, and to see in TNG, it's real, it's right there. We have to assume that a few dozen, perhaps many more, Federation science vessels went there, and they just decided to live there and spend their entire lives studying it, because that thing's going to be studied for generations. We never hear it mentioned again. They could have, if stories back then for television were being developed more like they're being developed these days, then you could have made that a season finale, and then the entire next season would have been about the sphere. They could have taken all the time they wanted to really unpack all the different aspects and all the things that it means. Whereas for what we got. It was that mentioned in one episode. It was never brought up on the show again. They did revisit the concept of Dyson spheres in Star Trek Online, and I think that particular sphere was seen. In fact, yeah, I think they named it the Janolan Dyson sphere. And they put in a few other spheres throughout the maps of Star Trek Online. And for one particular arc of stories, you were like traveling between a couple and flying around inside one extensively, carrying out a lot of missions. So that was an interesting visual backdrop to have the ship that you pilot in Star Trek Online flying around, buzzing the surface and seeing various different civilizations that are living inside it. It was really a fascinating expansion on this one episode concept. I enjoyed that one. I can't remember the name of the arc, but any players out there who play Star Trek Online, if you remember, then drop it in the comments somewhere. Because if I ever get a chance to play it again, I want to revisit that.
You know what it was, and I agree. It's a huge, fascinating concept, and one that sort of begs for more coverage, right? I mean, something more than a single episode. But I think what it came down to in the end was what were the dramatic possibilities. You do see episodes where even in a small enclave, you have a mixture of Klingons and Romulans and so on. So the question would be, what is it about the Dyson sphere that would lend itself to dramatic possibilities that you couldn't get otherwise? And I guess in the end, they didn't think it offered that much in the way of additional dramatic possibilities.
Yeah.
You know what the idea makes me think of is you're probably too young to remember these, Scott, but Mike, you might remember shows like Logan's Run and Star Lost.
Oh, God, you're right. Okay.
Shows like Logan's Run and Star Lost and
I did an
Fantastic
episode
Journey
with you about Logan's Run. How are you going to say I'm too young to remember that? We did an entire episode about it.
Oh yeah, okay. But it just wandering from civilization to civilization, which I mean certainly it's a format that I would love to see done well for a change. Because I've gone back and revisited a lot of those shows, and it just was not. Everybody was doing it, and I don't, aside from maybe the Incredible Hulk, I'm not sure that anyone really pulled it off well. Well, I guess what was the Michael Landon one where he was an angel? That one was okay too, but
Stairway to Heaven.
Highway to Heaven.
Highway to
Sorry, Highway. What am I? Oh, jeez. I quit. Never mind. I'm out.
I kind of think of I don't know if you guys remember the show Earth 2.
I love that show.
If you take that concept of a bunch of humans that are looking for another Earth to go live because this one's no good anymore, a concept of going and just building your own because you can't find another one that's perfect enough, so you go build your own Earth. I don't know. Maybe CBS All Access will make a show and call it Star Trek Dyson Sphere or something like that.
Well, we know from Picard that the show, not the man, that there were cultures advanced enough to string 8 stars together. So, Dyson spheres, small beans.
Yeah, if you're moving stars around.
Is small beans a phrase? Did I just make that up? Small beans.
Small potatoes.
There's a podcast network called Small Beans.
There's a phrase that Scotty uses more than once in the show that I think was overused, because one thing that I've noticed is when these characters come back from the original series, they always say something along the lines of, I was doing such and such when your grandfather was in diapers. Because Kirk says the same thing in Generations to Picard. And Scotty says it here. He says it to Geordi. And then in the next scene when he's in the bar, he says, I was drinking whiskey 100 years before you were born. I was like, we get it. You're old.
By the way, I never say things like that.
Yeah.
That could have been the name of this episode.
I may have said something like that.
So I don't know if it was just an editing thing or what, but the fact that he said it 2 scenes in a row seemed like a little bit of overkill.
Yeah, they were close enough together to be conspicuous.
Yeah.
Relic. I think they wanted to get that across. He wasn't just
He was a relic. Yeah. And when Geordi finally does let his guard down, when they have to rescue the Enterprise, he realizes that hey, Scotty is a pretty good engineer. This man knows his stuff. And Scotty takes to the tech. Of course, he's on the Genolan, so he kind of knows that tech a little better.
I think that might have been my favorite line when Scotty's like, "We can do this," and just like, "We can't do that." He quotes the manual to him. He's like, "Yeah, I wrote it. You can ignore that."
Yeah, I wrote that. Yeah, don't worry about that.
that was my favorite part of the episode because I love the technobabble. I live for that. And as much as TOS will always be my Star Trek. Their technobabble was really basic compared to TNG, and hearing Scotty saying TNG level technobabble just made that little heart pitter pat.
Diana Muldaur, the story is that the reason she was taken off the show after, was it season 2, was that she couldn't do the technobabble. It was just taking too long for her to deliver those lines.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, there were more than one actor that I've heard that were just like, it was like learning another language. Well, we talked to Susie Plaxton a lot, and she was just like, it was, the Klingon was easier than the technobabble.
I've got a couple of trivia things to share, and then I got a couple more questions for Mike before we in the show. So we talked about the Dyson sphere being an actual theory postulated by Freeman Dyson. He was asked in an interview about this episode, and he said that his daughter had sent him a copy of it that she recorded on VHS, and he said the episode is fun to watch, and even though it's all nonsense, it's still quite a good piece of cinema.
Well, that technobabble really didn't have that much of an underpinning in real science. Some of
yeah.
So you mentioned the transporter was like magic, basically magic, right?
Yeah. Well, yeah. Science far enough in the future, science can become big enough that it's basically magic. If we were to bring somebody from 80 years ago into our time and show them some stuff, they'd probably think a lot of it was magic.
Is that Clark's second law? Any sufficiently
advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic.
Yeah.
The Gathering.
You ruined it, John.
So the scene of the original Enterprise was made by looping footage of the empty bridge seen in the episode This Side of Paradise and blue screening it behind James Doohan. Because of this, only small parts of the set had to actually be built.
Right.
Ironically, Doohan didn't appear in that episode. The shot of the original view screen was recycled from the Mark of Gideon.
I didn't realize Scotty wasn't in that episode.
Yeah. And also the close-up of Scotty's hand on the control panel was somebody else's hand because James Doohan's missing 1 or 2 fingers on that hand because of an injury during World War II.
It was shot off during the D-Day invasion.
In Normandy, yeah.
They should have let him keep that. That's very engineer-like to be missing some digits.
Well, the fact that Roddenberry went for Geordi being blind was something of a concession for Roddenberry, because he was all about everyone's going to be perfect in the future. So, if you know that Doohan's missing a finger and you pay attention to it, he's always got that hand kind of in a fist whenever it's on screen. You never, in TOS, you never see his hand out. And anytime you're seeing the transporter, it's somebody else. when it's a close up on the hands.
I love the scene at the end when Scotty is saying goodbye to everybody, shaking hands, kissing the ladies, and then he passes by Worf and he just kind of looks at him. It's like, yeah, we didn't really associate with Klingons back in my days, so
never going to get comfortable with it. I enjoyed both of his takes when he saw him at the beginning and at the end of the episode.
Yeah,
his interactions with Worf.
Yeah.
And I have to admit, Mike, and my apologies, I only just found out that this book existed like last week, and I haven't had a chance to read it. I didn't know that there was even a novelization of the episode, but knowing that there was supposed to be a scene between Scotty and Troy makes that ending, because I was like, because he gives Troy a kiss, and I'm like, they never met.
Right. That's an interesting way to say hello goodbye.
Mhm.
yeah.
And again, if you were leaving and you had a chance to kiss Troy,
Well, yeah.
I had known just real quick about the scene with the away team on the interior of the Dyson Sphere, and the fact that there was a bit more to Scotty and Franklin making their way to the transporter. I knew that was in the book, even though, like Rick, I haven't had a chance to read it either. But my brother reads so many of the novels, and I know he's read the adaptation of Relics. I know he's a big fan of a lot of your work, Mike. So if he's watching or listening, I'm just hoping, as usual, that he's a little bit jealous, because he knows this is not the first time I've been on a show with you.
I wanted to ask you, after you write the book, do you have any say-so in what gets used when they make the audio book? Or is that completely out of your hands?
Typically, the writer of the book gets a chance to write the audio script.
Okay. Did you write this one? Because they cut all of the stuff, all of the extra stuff that you wrote was cut out of the audiobook.
Yeah. I think I'm to blame for that.
Okay.
The audio scripts, these were cassettes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And you only had a certain amount of running time. So naturally, the first thing you're going to cut out is the stuff that wasn't in there to begin with. Right?
Okay.
So yeah, that's sort of what ended up happening. It's a weird case of it's a TV script, and then it's a novel, and then it's essentially a radio script.
Mm-hmm.
So for that purpose, I went back to the original script.
Okay, that makes sense.
Then taking out all the stuff I'd added.
Because I had read the book when it came out years ago, and then when I was preparing for this, I thought, well, I'll just refresh myself by listening to the audiobook. And then I listened to the audiobook, and I was like, I remember there being a lot more.
Yeah. Well, nowadays you can do it word for word.
Yeah.
But in those days, you had to be very. You had about, any audio adaptation of books of that era, where you probably had about 30% of the book in there, which was probably about right.
And more often than not, they were having to be condensed down to one cassette. So that gives them about 90 minutes, I think.
Yeah, something like that. You can read 150 words a minute, so you're really reduced to the size of an episode. So it was easy to go from the TV screen. It was the easiest audio assignment I ever had. But nowadays, of course, you can go word for word.
Yeah.
There's no limitation.
That I'm so glad you told us that, because I've been frustrated for years. I've been an audiobook fan since you had to go to like a special store and rent them, or
I worked at one of those.
Check it out of the library. And it's always frustrated me that all of the old Star Trek books are heavily abridged. It never twigged to me that it would be limited by the amount of a cassette or two, because I didn't want to turn it into a huge suitcase full of cassettes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So we had one question come on here. Now I know that I've read a lot of Star Trek novels over the years, and I know that they're not really considered canon because the audience of the show that's actually going to go in and read the novels is not, it's not the entire audience of the show that's going to go and read the novels. So they can't put stuff in the novels that's canon. But do you read a lot of Star Trek novels that are not yours? I mean, what are some of your favorite Star Trek writers as far as novels?
Oh, well, let's see. Oh boy, you're going to get me in trouble because I have to now. So Peter David and Bob Greenberger and Keith DeCandido and Dave Mack and David Reagan George um, and Cox and who else and Dayton and Kevin Dillmore. So you're going to get me in trouble.
They're probably not listening anyways.
Among the first Star Trek novels that I read, Yesterday's Sun by Ann Crispin was one of my favorites.
That was a good one.
Late Ann Crispin. She was also a friend of mine, and that was really great because it was so much a step forward from the Star Trek novels at the time. Howie Weinstein was another one whose work I enjoyed reading early on. But in terms of I didn't read as many Star Trek novels as you might think because I relied on the editors, to a large extent. If I was going into territory that they had recently covered or I was going to contradict something they had recently covered, I'd be notified by the editor at the proposal level at that point. So I wouldn't be stepping on anybody's toes or violating any book continuity. I did read a little, but I was writing so many. I was probably writing 4 to 5 Star Trek books a year at one point, and also writing Star Trek comics, and so I had to keep up with the show at the time, or shows, and if there was overlap. But when you're reading a book, particularly a book, a Star Trek book, and writing a book at the same time, it's a little like trying to write music while you're listening to music. It's just too distracting. So I didn't do that.
Yeah. There's a lot of new stuff coming out over the last few years from Star Trek. Are we going to see any new Star Trek material from Michael Jan Friedman anytime soon?
I don't think so.
No.
I've reached out to the powers that be at the publishing program, and it's I think if I really made it my business, I would nail them down and get them to give me a go ahead on something. I'm just I'm doing a lot of work on stories that I really want to write, and I'd love to do more Star Trek, but I love even more the idea of writing exactly what I want to write.
Right.
I'm doing a lot of independent publishing now, using Kickstarters to get books off the ground, and that's been successful. Knock on wood. I'm knocking on wood now, and there I can write exactly the stories I want to write. For instance, I have a series about a 21st century Aztec Empire noir murder mystery.
Cool.
And when I pitched that to an editor at Del Rey at one point years ago, she said, "I love that idea, Mike. That's a great idea. When you write that, I want to read it. I can't buy it. I can't buy it. She goes, can you imagine? One of our guys trying to sell a chain bookstore buyer? Oh yeah, it's a 21st century Aztec Empire noir murder mystery. The guy's head would explode, right? Where do I put it in the store? Everywhere. So I had the opportunity, by virtue of these Kickstarters, I have the opportunity to do exactly the thing that I want. So that's kind of a long answer, but the bottom line is I would love to do some more Star Trek, but I'm very happy doing the independent work I'm doing.
Can I ask
Go
you
ahead.
just a really quick question while we're on this particular subject? If somebody came up to you and said, "I want to start reading your books," what would you say would be you would want somebody to read who is new to your stuff?
Well,
and it doesn't have to be Star Trek. Just
it's a really good question. I would direct. I'd entertain two possibilities. One is Double Double, which is it's a TOS book. It's the very first Star Trek book I ever did. And when I look at that, I see a lot of energy in there and a lot of good storytelling, if I can say so myself.
Mm-hmm.
And I would highly recommend that to anyone who's at all familiar with TOS. Double Double. It takes off on the episode "What a Little Girl's Made Of." So these are androids, and particularly an android duplicate of Kirk takes over the Enterprise. Nobody knows, and it, I think that would be a good introductory book. The other thing would be Starfleet Year One, which is very much a part of the continuity, but not. It has no characters in it that you've seen on the screen. This was.
Ooh, I love it already.
Yeah, it adheres to the established continuity. Everything's. The idea is that it's sort of the right stuff kind of.
Cool.
Where these are the scientists and the military people, and they're kind of struggling to see who's going to have the upper hand in this new Starfleet they're talking about. And the prize is the first Daedalus ship, the Daedalus.
Oh,
Daedalus comes up several times in the continuity in the TOS and in Next Generation, and so it's very firmly lodged in the continuity. But these are all none of these characters are anybody you've seen in any incarnation of Star Trek. So I'm really proud of that book. I'd be tempted to offer that as an entry into whatever.
Thank you.
And I would recommend Reunion. I think Reunion was the first Star Trek novel that I remember ever reading, which deals a lot with Picard's past. With it goes into a lot of the stuff with the Stargazer and how Jack Crusher was killed and things like that. It's a really good book. And Death in Winter. There was a 9-book series that came out. What year was it, Mike, when they started coming out with those books? It was early 2000s, I think, mid 2000s.
Early 2000s.
Yeah.
And that was the first post-series continuity for Star Trek Next Generation characters.
Yeah, so it was a continuation of the Next Generation, and it was 9 novels, and they were all written by different authors. So, and Mike wrote the first one, and then just for a little bit of fun, I've always liked X-Men Planet X.
Yeah.
Where the Next Generation crew and the X-Men crossover.
Right. We were talking about Scotty crossing over with the crew of the Enterprise D, that was a great, fun assignment. That was incredible. I had Worf and Wolverine in the holodeck. And I had Nightcrawler talking to Geordi about teleportation, and I actually had Picard in the holodeck meeting Professor X.
Yeah.
Sweet.
that Patrick Stewart was going to be playing Professor X. So that was kind of cool. It seemed, predictive, but it was obvious to me that if anyone ever did play Professor X, it would be Patrick.
Yeah.
But the coolest moment I think in that book is there's a character called B.G. Robinson. She's like a transporter operator, and we see her in the Outrageous Icona, right? So that first season episode, and she's played by Terry Hatcher, right? So Terry Hatcher,
right.
on, of course, to play in Lois and Clark.
Right.
So here's Archangel, the X-Men character, flying around the ship, and he flies by her, and she goes, this character who was played by Terry Hatcher, she goes, I can't believe a man can fly. So there were a lot of great opportunities in that book, and if you read the comments on Amazon, you'll see people either loved it or hated it. And the trickiest part of that was coming up with a tone where both the X-Men characters and the Next Generation characters could kind of meet, because they're very different tones. The superhero science fiction and Star Trek kind of science fiction are two different levels, two different kinds of suspension of disbelief. So finding a level where they could both exist was tricky.
Real quick before we end, did you watch Star Trek Picard?
I did. I have watched it. Yes.
Did you like it?
I liked it a lot. I don't think it was perfect. First of all, I better say I liked it because I know some of the writers. I have to be very careful.
Right.
But I liked it a lot. I liked him a lot in it. I particularly liked, the kind of homey details, the character bits. I thought were the strongest part of it. I thought it lost a little steam at the end. Maybe they were trying to get too much in there, but at one point in the last episode, things are really building to a fever pitch, and Picard's taking a nap. What?
Yeah.
Yeah, he's not a young guy, but he's taking a nap. I don't think so. But
I kind of related to him a lot at that moment, to be honest.
But I can relate to it, but we don't have to save the universe,
right?
I could nitpick it a little bit, but by and large, I liked it a lot. It was very satisfying in terms of how it dealt with Data and Troy and Riker, and how it fit into the Star Trek universe. And it did something that I had been hoping they would do for a while, which was move the saga forward in time. As much as I like Discovery in a lot of ways, I kind of questioned why they would go back in time to show us something that, at least part of which, we knew how it would come out. So you kind of giving yourself problems you don't really need, because it's harder to build jeopardy when some of the outcomes. And I know I always said, just take the whole thing forward, and Picard, the series, does that. So I was happy to see.
Yeah, and Discovery is going to do that starting this season. They're jumping way forward. So, if anybody wants to check out the stuff that you're working on now, have you got a website they can look at?
Yeah, well, they can go to michaeljanfriedman.net, because some rascal stole Michael. and see a lot of what I'm doing. They can also go to Crazy 8 Press. it could be the numeral or the word crazy8press.com, and that's the writers group that I helped to found 10 years ago. And we're all doing, I mentioned that 21st century Aztec Empire noir murder mystery as something I wanted to do that would be difficult to publish traditionally. We're all in Crazy 8 Press, we're all doing that type of thing. The kind of project that we really want to do, and the kind of project that really, I think, comes out, really excels because we're passionate about the project. And you'll see some names there at crazy8press.com that are very familiar to Star Trek fans.
And we're going to try to have you back sometime in the next couple months, because we're going to talk about Crossover, which is a novel that you wrote that brings Scotty and Spock and McCoy all back together.
Yeah.
And so I'll look forward to talking to you then. But thank you for being here tonight. I appreciate it.
Sure, my pleasure.
Thank you.
Sure.
And go ahead. I'm sorry. Were you going to say something?
Just thank you to you guys. You're all very knowledgeable, and I appreciate
that. Rick, let everybody know where they can find you.
Go to starbasecommand.net. You can find all the shows that I do there, or right here on the Cosmic Potato Network. I'm on most of the shows.
All right. And Scott?
Also right here on the Cosmic Potato Network, I appear on several shows, and my own podcast, The Prime Direction, will be beginning season 3 very soon. Episode 1 is in the editing bay here at Ramnus Station. Episode 2 will be recorded tomorrow as of this recording. You can get updates on Twitter at Prime Direct Pod. You can also keep up with my graphic artwork on Twitter at Planet Rise, or visit my website, www.planetrisecreative.com.
And John Irons.
Hi. You can hear me on Captain Game Show. It's the trivia wordplay podcast on the network. I'm also appear on various shows ever since Sean talked me into starting a podcast. So I pretty much appear on any show. I kind of follow him around like the little dog on the Looney Tunes.
Which way did they go? Which way did they go?
You can find me on Twitter and Facebook at Captain Game Show.
All right. And that'll do it for this episode. If you want to get in touch with us, then make sure you stay tuned, and we'll let you know how momentarily. Be sure to join the Facebook group so you'll know when we do these live shows, and you can take part, ask us questions, give us comments, what have you. Join us in a couple of weeks as we continue our crossover series by reviewing the first film featuring the crew as they reunite with Captain James T. Kirk in Star Trek Generations. All right. Thanks for listening. All right, Mike, I appreciate it.
No, my pleasure. Thanks, guys. Thanks for the provocative conversation.
Thank you. It's always great to talk to you, sir.
Yeah, same here. And I guess I'll see most of you, if not all of you, when we do crossover.
Yeah.
And I will read the book before the next time, I promise.
All right.
All right. Good night, Mike.
All right, good. Thanks a lot, guys. I'll see you later.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
All right.
I forgot he was going to be on tonight. I was just chatting away with him before we started, and it was like, Mike, and then we started, and you're like, and Michael J. I'm like, okay.
I'm tapping out.
I noticed you nodding off there a little bit.
Yeah.
Long day.
I tried to help out. I sent a private message in there, just say, John.
Yeah, I just read it.
I tell you, I went to I was telling Rick before we started that we went to this zoo today because we're social distancing. We're trying to find things that we can do without like going to stores and things like that, which a lot of stuff is starting to reopen, but there's still a lot of things that are still closed. And they've got this zoo up in Huntsville that's you stay in your car and you just drive around, and the animals come up to you, and you can feed them out of a cup. And there's like stuff like they've got a couple of ox in there. There's some sheep, some goats, llamas, ostriches, stuff like that. They got a giraffe and a camel. And but everybody in the state of Alabama had the same idea. So we got there at around, we were supposed to start the show tonight at 8:00 my time, right? So we get there at 1:30 and have to wait in line until about, we didn't actually get through the gate to actually start seeing the animals until around 4:30.
Wow.
Yikes.
And then it took forever to go through it because it's bumper to bumper and people are stopping to see the animals and all that. So we didn't actually leave there until, that's when I was texting you guys saying, hey, I'm going to be about a half an hour late, because I was looking at the clock. I was like, it's 2 hours to get back home. There's no way I'm going to make it by 8:00. So
I can hear my radiator complaining from the parking lot just hearing this conversation.
no, the car held up pretty good. Let's see. I just sent Chris oh, he just saw it. Okay, so he should be joining. All right.
Is Chris coming?
Yeah, he's coming to talk about unification with us.
Yeah, I gotta praise him for his latest episode of Quantum Leap. I just listened to it last night.
What's the
I don't
latest
think I've
one?
listened to it yet. Do what?
What?
Which one is the latest?
They cover
I'll be right
What a Wonderful Leap.
Oh, I haven't
like-
listened to that yet.
I like that episode. I haven't heard the podcast yet, but I do like that episode.
I think it just dropped yesterday.
You
If not that, then the day before.
it's one of the ones that you could, when Quantum Leap was on Netflix, you couldn't watch it.
Oh, they didn't have it on there?
No, it had something to do with the music that they use in the episode.
Yeah. There are two named songs that are like part of the dialogue. It's not background stuff, so
Yeah.
they wouldn't have been able to get the rights for that. All right. Do we have a minute for me to exchange my beverage? And
Yeah, go ahead.
All right. I will.
All right. Good night.
Good night, guys. I'll talk to you soon.
John, if you follow Sean around like the dog on the cartoons, every now and again, do you like talk so much that Sean will slap you in the face and say, "Shut up"?
He tries, but I am wary.
He's faster than me. I'm a big guy.
Yeah.
All right. Good night.
All right, we love you, John. We'll see you.
Funny. Take him out of the stream. All right.
I was able to control myself. And I did not call out Mike live on the podcast for not sending me a happy birthday on Facebook, which he's done for the past 2 or 3 years. This is the first time in multiple years that he has forgotten to say happy birthday on Facebook. I was shocked.
I don't know if they've moved the birthday notification or something. I don't see it as much as I used to. The little notifications that come up saying, "Hey, it's such and such's birthday." I don't see it as much as I used to. So.
I get it. It pops up on the lock screen on my phone. I don't even have to open the app.
Oh yeah, mine doesn't do that. So.
I'll get it right in my pop-up notifications.
Well, happy birthday.
Okay. All right, I'll be back.
Okay. We're still live.
Hi, honey, I'm home. I'm not changing this time. Fuck it, you guys don't care if you look the same from week to week.
Well, I haven't even ended the I haven't ended the broadcast, so we're just doing one long broadcast. Nobody's watching right now. I mean, we had a couple of people watching a few minutes ago, but they're not on there right now. Come back.
Oh, it was nice to see you at the my little gathering last night.
Oh yeah.
I don't know. I don't remember. I don't know if I acknowledged you or not, but if I didn't, I did see you there.
I would have just come on board, but you guys were already about 2/3 of the way through your conversation, and everything that you were saying was probably a lot smarter than anything I could come up with. So,
dude, we were telling like drunken hangover stories and stuff.
Yeah,
it was not a highbrow conversation at all.
There's
Hey,
Chris. Hey,
Chris, long time no see.
Hey, right?
Hey, Scott, did you get the recording? that I sent you. Your mic isn't on.
Your mic's not on.
I did. Thank you.
There we go. Have you had a chance to
Chris.
listen to it?
Yeah, it sounds good.
Okay, good.
It'll work.
I wasn't I left it in. You heard me saying to M that I wasn't sure if the ending you wanted it to be computer like or just naturally read, so we gave you both options.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah, I decided when I was talking to Mike, Chris, we just recorded the episode about Relics, and we had Michael Jan Friedman on.
Okay.
Because he wrote the novelization.
Right.
And I decided not to, when I was talking about the audiobook, I decided not to add in how terrible James Doohan's performance on the audiobook was. But he may see this recording. I mean, we're still live, but Mike, if you see this, I'm sorry. But there was one point when James Doohan was supposed to be acting out Data's part, and he talked like this to be Data.
That sounds about right.
But the book is good. And James Doohan's performance was good, especially when he was doing Scotty, because nobody can do Scotty like he does. He did,
Yeah.
Just you could tell.
Son does a pretty good job with it on Star Trek Continues.
Yeah, true. You could just tell he wasn't a big fan of the Next Generation. Actually, the one thing that I didn't put in the trivia was the fact that he thought he did not like the fact that they were doing another Star Trek when the show first started, and it took him years, and finally, I think one of his kids talked him into when he got the script. They talked him into watching a few episodes, and he actually liked it, so he went ahead and did the episode. But
so he's like every other TOS fan originally.
Yeah. Yeah.
Basically, right?
All right, let's
Before we get rolling, I just want to sneak in real quick. Chris?
Yes, sir.
I listened to the latest episode of the Quantum Leap podcast.
Little Miracle?
Yeah.
No, it's a Wonderful Leap.
Yeah, it's
See, we're still confusing it for the Christmas episode.
Right.
Go ahead.
I'm not generally the type of person that will laugh out loud at something, especially if I'm watching or listening by myself.
Mm-hmm.
I could not stop just chuckling out loud every time that whoever was editing the episode dropped in the angel.
Well, it was Allison's inspiration to notice that, and I produce and edit all the episodes, so I dropped it in where I felt it was appropriate.
It was perfect. It got to the point where I was hoping it would show up, and every time I hear that come out, I just started to laugh.
I'm glad you enjoyed it. Thank you.
we've got to get Allison on Cosmic Potato at some point, or Captain Game Show. She'd be good on, because I was a fan of Allison back when she was on the site that she doesn't like to talk about.
We shouldn't mention that. But, she's got, movie nights is really great. She's just so funny. Without her, it would just be me, because I've come to realize this about myself. I'm more of a producer, sort of straight man. Let's just get the show rolling kind of person. And it was like working with Skip and now working with Allison. Like, they bring what I think makes it actually a show and makes it entertaining. I feel like I'm just like a facilitator, and I can talk a lot, but I feel like they bring what makes the show like really the show. So working with Matt and Allison, I just feel like we have a really great chemistry together, and I try not to take it for granted. I really am very grateful, and I tell them that all the time. So, but she's great. She's like our rock star. She's our secret weapon.
But you get extra kudos, especially for me, for catching that it was Vaughn Armstrong that played Trump Sr. in the cab in that episode.
Oh, it's IMDb.
I didn't catch it.
Every podcaster's secret weapon.
I didn't catch it because I watched the episode right before I listened to you guys.
Okay.
Because my job, I'm able to do that because no one notices me. But it was when the closing credits were rolling and I saw his name. I said, "Holy crap, it's Vaughn Armstrong. Where was he?" So I had to go back and find him. Yeah,
it was Trump Sr.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm sure we're going to get some hate mail over some of the comments about that. But what are you going to do?
Lose him. They're not worth it.
Yeah. All right, here we go. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the show. This is Star Trek All Access, and we're continuing our crossover series by reviewing episodes which feature the return of TOS characters. Tonight, we will be discussing Unification, Parts 1 and 2. Part 1 was written by Jerry Taylor and directed by Les Landau. Part 2 was written by Michael Piller and directed by Cliff Bowl, and originally aired in November of 1991. The quick IMDb description is that Picard and Data follow Spock into Romulan space on a dangerous mission. And joining me tonight in the historic Cosmic Potato Studio, we have right here, we have Rick. How's it going, Rick?
Jolan True, everyone.
And down there, we have Scott. How's it going, Scott?
Since it is logical to conclude that you will introduce me in any event, I choose not to cooperate.
And right there, we have Chris. How's it going, Chris?
Just fine. I'm great. How are you guys? Great to be here. Thanks.
Okay, so let's do what we normally do. We just give an overall idea of what you felt about this episode, what you liked, what you didn't like. Rick, what are your feelings on Unification?
I love these two episodes, 99% of them. And then the 1% I don't like has blonde hair. I mean, I honestly don't remember if they made a big deal about Nimoy being in it or not. I'm sure they did.
Oh yeah, I remember. I'm not trying to step on your toes, but
no.
I think I was a teenager when this came out, and I remember it being in the newspaper, like in the entertainment section. But it was in the newspaper. Spock is going to appear on the Next Generation.
Yeah.
So,
and then we didn't get him until the very last second of the first episode. Now, was this a season-end cliffhanger, or was this just a mid-season two-parter?
It was mid-season two-part.
So we only had to wait a week. This stuff. What season was this for?
This was the fourth season. This was the 25th anniversary of Star Trek, is what this was hyping, and the movie Star Trek 6 was supposed to come out the following month.
That's right. I was in the Air Force at the time. That's why I don't remember a lot of the press, because I was too busy to be watching TV, and I worked I was working the 3 to 11 shift. So that's why I honestly didn't know. Never mind. I don't know where I was going with that. I couldn't remember what sort of press it got, but it didn't matter because I didn't always pay attention to that kind of stuff. But we didn't get Spock until the very end. But seeing Picard and Data as Romulans was entertaining enough, and of course the pathos of the final scene of the second episode is just. I love that bit right there because there's I love this episode. Yeah, I'm done.
All right, Scott, what about you?
Also, like Rick, I enjoy this two-parter immensely. I have two favorite moments from the first half. One is the final shot, because we finally get what we've all been waiting for, and then we realize that it's he has exactly one line more than Luke Skywalker does at the end of The Force Awakens. We're like, really, that's it? Okay, I'll come back for the next one. My other favorite moment would be Picard visiting Sarek, which is again just heartbreaking, but so well performed by the both of them. And when you look at these two episodes put together, I enjoy it because not just because we get more of Spock, who is he's a balm for the soul just to hear the voice, especially for those of us who had been living with it and growing up with it for so long. It just, once he comes onto the scene and he starts talking, you realize nothing can go wrong with this episode. Everything is going to be fine because Spock is here. And the rest of what happens in this two-parter, story-wise, there's not a lot in the way of action. It's much more of a thinker, not really a tense thriller episode, but they're following characters, and there's some intrigue, and we're getting a glimpse into the underground, what do they call them, the Romulan underground. What were they referred to as in this episode?
Oh, I was going to say Tal Shiar, but no.
Did they have a name?
I can't, because I don't know if they were like the Resistance or the but we know who we're talking about, the group that gathers in the cave. Mm-hmm. We get to know that they exist and what they want, and the fact that Romulus is not just one homogenous society of liars and sneaky people, and you want to learn more about that as we go. So a lot of fun to watch. I think I had less of a blonde problem than Rick did with the episode, but it was
the character. So
yeah, it was a little bit jarring for her to come out of nowhere and be a problem, but not much of a problem, because she gets dispensed with pretty quickly. But if you set that aside, then it's really a great episode. And Stephen Root as a Klingon, come on. That's just icing on the cake.
All right. Chris, what about you?
I did not like this. This to me was painful to get through.
Wait, I'm going to go through my drawer. I'm going to see if I can find my surprised face. Hold on. Nope.
I remember not being impressed with this episode the first time I saw it, and I watched it because Nimoy was on it, and revisiting it again earlier today to get ready for the podcast, because I don't think I'd seen it in 20 years. It just pointed out almost everything I dislike about Next Gen, almost everything I dislike about Next Gen makeup, almost everything I dislike about Next Gen pacing, and nothing about this episode gelled for me. And to have this event where you have Nimoy back in the most iconic role in all of Star Trek, one of the most iconic roles in all of science fiction, and for it to utterly bore me to tears and to not feel a damn thing about the story or the characters or any bit of it, it's such a disappointment to me, because I really want to like it. There's a lot of excellent Next Gen. To reiterate what you guys said, I think Mark Leonard was amazing in it. I love seeing Sarek again. But that being said, I could not give two dinks about anything that was going on screen. And I mean, I guess we can get into some of the stuff that turned me off, but what'd you say, Scott? They're not a society of just secretive, nasty people, but they are a homogenous society of haircuts and shoulder pads. I mean, it's just
true enough.
Yeah, I've always had a problem with that, with the Romulans and the Cardassians, especially, that it seems like the entire society always wears the same outfit and has the same haircut.
Right. And I can understand where, as a Vulcan male, and if you're a Vulcan that is logical, like that, like the Spock bowl haircut kind of makes sense in that context, because it's very no nonsense. It's just, you just wash and wear, basically. But why would Romulans adopt that aesthetic? And if you're going to make the Romulans adopt that aesthetic, why give them everybody such screamingly bad wigs? Just comb the actor's hair. The only one that had natural looking hair in that entire series was Nimoy, because it was, they just combed his Spock do out. Everything about the way that they portrayed the Romulans in Next Gen to me was wrong. And this sort of cemented my distaste for the ridges and for the clothing and just for what. This is an advanced society. Why are they meeting in caves? There's a cave system under the capital city.
There's always a cave, and then there's always caves.
I mean, don't they have coffee shops on Romulus? Don't they? I don't know.
Apparently, they have soup shops.
I don't know how many Next Generation and Deep Space Nine episodes wound up in a cave.
I guess. And that goes back to
Planet
TOS
Hell was
too.
right there. So
Yeah.
But yeah. So I mean, I'll get into more specifics, but
I will. Like I said, I was a teenager when this episode came out. I wasn't. I had watched the original series. I wasn't what I would call an original series fan at that point. I'm much more tuned into it now. But over the years, this episode is good. I would definitely put it in rotation of some of my favorite episodes. But I've never been one that really liked the political episodes that much. I'm much more. I like the sci-fi, techie aspect of Star Trek more. So it's sitting like in my top 10, but I mean, I'd put it in my top 20. And that's mainly because of Nimoy's performance and Mark Leonard's performance. Mark Leonard's performance, like Scott said, was heartbreaking. And like I said, when we talked about the episode Sarek, Mark Leonard didn't read the entire script. You know, they only gave him the pages that he needed for his scene. So he didn't know Sarek was going to die in that episode. I saw Mark Leonard at a convention. He told this story where he was at a convention and they were playing the episode on a screen, and he heard Nimoy say, "Sarek has died." And he was like, oh, he has, huh? So, and of course, I mean, we still got one more performance from him as Sarek in Star Trek 6 after that, but I think it had already been filmed by the time this episode came out and everything. So
there are two other supporting characters that I think really stand out for me in this episode. One is another throwback to TOS, and that's Malachi Throne as Senator Pardak. He was Commodore Mendez in The Cage, or in the Menagerie.
Yeah.
So that was at the time. It's funny. When I was a kid, I thought his name was Malachi Throne.
Yeah.
And then many years later, I was like, oh, it's Malachi. But the other one that is Graham Jarvis as Mr. Dokachin, or the guy that runs the scrapyard where they find
Dokachin.
Yeah.
Dokachin.
Yeah. I loved his absolutely deadpan performance. And the line, like, you probably think because you're the first beautiful woman I've talked to in ages that I'm going to be more cooperative, and you're probably right.
And Gowron's in this episode too, which is always fun when he shows up, because he's one of the most energetic Klingons that there are. But so I find it, one thing that I found a little odd, I kind of get the suspicion that this episode was actually supposed to come out later in the season, because like I said before, Star Trek 6 didn't come out until December of 91, and this episode came out in November. And in this episode, he's referencing things that happened in Star Trek 6, which I thought was a little odd when I rewatched it, knowing that, the last time I rewatched it, I didn't realize the timing of the episode, but getting my notes prepared for this episode, I was like, well, wait a minute. It didn't come out for another month. Why is he talking about what happened to Kirk and Bones before anybody had even seen the movie? Which he didn't say anything that like ruined the plot or anything, but it would have got everybody like, what's he talking about? What happened to Kirk and Bones?
Well, you know what? That's ringing a bell now. I don't know if I was aware of it at the time or if I've read stuff about it. It all kind of blends together after a while. I think that was intentional. That was kind of a sneaky bit of promo for the movie.
Yeah. From what I understand, it was orchestrated to basically promote Star Trek 6, and they scrambled to get Nimoy into Next Gen to sort of help. I guess it was like a symbiotic thing. so that they would get some more eyes on Next Gen. And I guess anyone who was watching Next Gen, maybe who wasn't a TOS fan or whatever, it might intrigue them to go see the film. This is all probably half remembered from shit I heard them talking about on the blog. So I can't.
It could also get lost because if you didn't know, I mean, obviously most Star Trek fans at the time knew that there was a movie coming out, but if you didn't know that what he was talking about was referencing that movie, you might start trying to think of stuff that happened in previous movies. What's he talking about? I don't remember this, but I'm probably just putting too much thought into it. But anyway,
it's what we do.
Yeah. So Picard receives news that Spock may have defected to the Romulan Empire. They seem to have surveillance suggesting it. Really, they just have a picture of Spock on Romulus, which, I mean, he wasn't officially supposed to be there, but that doesn't necessarily mean he defected. I don't know why they automatically jumped to that. I mean, he's loyally served Starfleet for a generation. I don't know why they would automatically assume that he was a traitor. But so he goes to Picard goes to Vulcan to see Sarek, who we know that he met before in the last episode that we reviewed in Sarek, and they remind us that Sarek is suffering from Bendai syndrome. So he brings, what was Sarek's wife's name?
Perry.
He brings her to the Enterprise to talk to her. That, when I was watching the episode earlier this week, that jumped out to me. It's like, why didn't he just go there? Why did he bring her away from her dying husband to come and talk to her? Or why didn't he just talk to her over a subspace frequency or something like that?
Because then you couldn't have her overacting badly in a scene with Patrick Stewart. Because that scene was just downright painful. And also the costuming that they had her in with those giant chunky crystals on her shirt. This might be just having podcasted with Allison a little too long because she's always talking about the clothes, but I notice them now, and boy howdy, was that the worst costume.
I think, help me out from the episode Sarek. That she was wearing similar jewelry in that one, right? With
they just made like these big
bit on the
panels full of rocks.
Yeah. Okay.
Just terrible.
It's
a nitpick. I have so many nitpicks.
We're all going to be dressing like that in the 24th century.
Hell, I took my rocks off before we did this episode because they're. I don't want
to say you got your rocks off before this. No, I'm sorry.
As soon as the words came out of my mouth, I'm like, this is a mistake.
For a fleeting moment, I thought it might be possible that we would all be grown up enough to give it a pass.
Oh,
Sean said what we were all thinking.
Whatever. I can't let that go. So his Bendai syndrome has gotten a lot worse. He's almost completely out of his mind, but he does have a moment of lucidity, and he tells Picard that he gives Picard the name Pardek. It tells him he's a senator that he needs to contact. Spock's always he's always wanted to help the Romulans and the Vulcans come back together and have a unification. Because as we know, the Romulans and the Vulcans used to be the same race. And then at some point in history, they got away from each other and the Vulcans went the way of logic and the Romulans went the way of insanity. I don't know.
They went the way of forehead ridges.
Yeah
exactly. Actually, I think it was a novel. Was it Diane Carey? Spock's World. Who wrote Spock's World? I probably have it right here on the shelf, but they talked about basically the history of Vulcan and the split. Again, it's all apocrypha. It's all like in the novel series. It's not canon, but it was a very interesting take on, why they split. And they brought it all the way back to the teachings of Surak. And they made it that Surak had an apprentice that was really not keen on the embracing total logic. So it was his followers, like his faction, that kind of went off world and went off to found the Romulan Empire, which is why the Romulans still embrace their emotions and can be duplicitous and, like Vulcans. aren't.
His name was Spanakin.
But it was an interesting take, and anytime I think of the Romulans and the Vulcans in the split, I automatically go back to that book as to, oh yeah, that's why.
So the Romulans emerged from the Vulcans, and then the Remans emerged from the Romulans.
The Remans emerged from total bullshit.
Yeah.
The Remans, I think if you look at the Remans, it's like Saruman came to Romulus and created them.
Picard calls in a favor from Gowron. I don't know what. I guess it's because they were doing this episode as the 25th anniversary special. They wanted to have, not only did they want to have Nimoy here, and they also wanted to have Mark Leonard back, but they wanted to get as many of the Star Trek races in there as we can. Let's have the Vulcans. Let's also have the Romulans, but we've got to get the Klingons to take him from Vulcan to Romulus. So he needs a cloaked ship, and he gets Gowron to give him one and escort him to Romulan space, which brings about probably my favorite scene in the first part, which is where Picard's trying to sleep and Data is just standing there staring at him. And he's like, I'm sorry, was I disturbing you? And then just turns around and stares at the wall, and it's even worse.
I agree that's an incredibly funny scene, and there are a lot of parts about it that work. But if anyone asks, the absolute peak of that scene is after I think it's the second time. Yeah, because Picard asks him why he's just standing there, and he says that Data tells him what he's doing, stops his explanation. Picard turns around and lays down, but now Data is remains looking directly at him. And now Picard is uncomfortable. Why are you looking at me? I'm not looking at anything. And he asks him to turn around. And the way Data does it, and for people who are watching, you'll see this on the camera, is he's looking, and he'll turn, but he holds that look.
Yeah.
Until just the very end.
Because he's just looking at him like, that's a strange request, Captain, but I'll do it.
Well, that's the moment where, for the people who believe, like the hosts on Mission Log, who believe that Data does have emotions, whether they say he doesn't or not, he's pranking Picard with that one. He's just holding that look just to be a dick about it, because it's
yeah. I lost my place. Hold on a second. Okay. So they finally get to the planet, and I wanted to talk a little bit about their idea to disguise themselves as Romulans, because they do this a lot on Star Trek, where they supposedly surgically alter themselves to look like different races. Mm-hmm. And on Enterprise, we even see characters get themselves altered to look like a race that's not even been contacted, just so they can go have shore leave on their planet, and I always thought that was kind of strange that a race of people, somebody can come in and we just alter ourselves to look like you, and they can't tell. It's like, obviously, you're not you're not what I am. You're not Romulan. It doesn't look, I mean, you would think that a Romulan would be able to tell, but I mean, they just had their makeup done by the same makeup artist that did theirs, so yeah. so it works. But in real life,
just as bad.
So. Yeah. In real life, I don't think, and also it's the thing where our actual 21st century technology supersedes what they had at the time that the show was made. So now we have all this facial recognition software that's available. Google has it everywhere anyway, so that the FBI and the CIA can find terrorists in crowds of people and stuff like that. You think by the 24th century that would be available out there, and it would be scanning. Hey, why is Picard and Data walking around on Romulus dressed as Romulans?
Well, we know that they have surveillance because that's how they found the picture of Spock on Romulus.
Yeah, yeah. But you would think that they would have like the facial recognition, hey, scan their nose to their ear and all that kind of stuff and say, oh, yeah, hey, that's Picard.
But are they looking for Picard? Or is it just, is there like a database of faces that would flag like almost like a keyword, like a trigger word? Hey,
well, there's theories going around out there.
Double check that.
Yeah, there's theories going around out there, and I don't subscribe to the theory, but in Nemesis we find out that Shinzon was created by DNA gathered from Picard, and there's a theory going around out there that this is where this episode, when he's on Romulus, is where they got that DNA from. Of course, we never see him bleed or anything like that on the planet, but
listen, nature calls. That's all I'm gonna say. They were on the planet for a good long time.
That's true.
For people who read the books, that's not where it happened.
Well, it wouldn't, time-wise, it wouldn't happen because this is only about 12 years maybe before Nemesis.
Mm-hmm.
And Shinzon was more than 12 years old.
It's interesting that we're talking about this now rather than the last episode we recorded when we had Michael Jan Friedman here, because it was in his book where he detailed at the very beginning. It was in either chapter 1 or the prologue, if there was a prologue. In Death in Winter, it was explained that a Romulan agent acquired Picard's DNA at Beverly and Jack's wedding.
Okay. Were they hiding in the bathroom?
Some questions should never be answered.
Yeah.
He got it off some silverware.
Oh, okay.
You dirty little boy.
Chris is the one that said nature call.
I'm just thinking what he might have left behind. You know what we leave behind? In Picard's case. I mean, he was in a cave for like 48 hours. I don't think that they have flush toilets in caves.
Who hasn't hoped to hook up at a wedding? I mean, come on.
So we finally see Spock at the end of episode 1, but now this is a little bit behind the scenes kind of stuff. The way Nimoy's schedule worked out, they had to film part 2 before they filmed part 1. So the first scene that they actually filmed was the scene at the end of part 1 where he comes out and says, all the other stuff from part 2 was filmed before the stuff that we actually saw in part 1. So this scene where Spock comes out and confronts Picard and Data and everything, that was the first thing that they actually filmed. And he wants Picard to leave Romulus. Picard informs him that the Federation has concerns over his cowboy diplomacy, and also he tells him about Sarek, that Sarek's died. This cowboy diplomacy is a term that gets repeated a few times in this episode, and I believe gets brought up in a later episode. Doesn't somebody bring Picard some intelligence from Spock in a later episode and says the words cowboy diplomacy so that he'll know that it's actual intel?
Mm-hmm. It's I think Face of the Enemy is the title, when Troy is abducted and forced to go undercover as a officer of the Tal Shiar.
Yeah. That's right.
In that episode, we also see a human who had defected to the Romulan Empire, and he returns to the Federation, and the Enterprise picks him up. Riker is really mad at him, tells him, "I want to see you in that uniform. Give you." And the guy says, "Okay, but I need to talk to the captain." And Riker's like, "Effing no." The guy says, "I have a message from Spock," and that it's that defector who tells Picard that Spock had sent a message along with him saying is more cowboy diplomacy.
Yeah.
Long answer, sorry.
No, he tells Picard that during the peace negotiations with the Klingons, which happened decades earlier, he felt responsible for putting Captain Kirk and the crew at risk, which is why he's wanting to work alone now. But he's on a personal mission of peace. He's wanting to reunify the Vulcans and the Romulans, and he's working with this underground movement to try and get that done. So, Pardek had asked him to come to Romulus to meet with this proconsul, and Picard has the concerns that the Romulans may have ulterior motives, and Spock's like, well, yeah, that may be true, but it's best if I just play this out.
Mm-hmm.
So let's talk about Sela.
Must we?
Yeah, because when was the first? When did we meet Sela? It wasn't this episode. This was the last time we saw her.
It was
Oh,
no, not Code of Honor, not Matter of Honor. It was the one with the Romulan with the blockade and
no.
the Klingon Civil War. And Data's in command of a ship because that was part 2 of it. Was
well, you're thinking of Redemption.
Redemption, that's the one.
And I think because that was a season finale and opener, and I think the end of part 1, which ended that season, I think it saw her come out of the shadows and say, "Don't underestimate Picard.
Yeah,
it's human, etc., etc." That's not the first time we technically saw her. It was, and I'm absolutely going up on the title of the episode, but Geordi is kidnapped by Romulans and brainwashed to be an assassin.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And
because I remember the holodeck simulation of him killing O'Brien and all that kind of stuff. Yeah.
And we never see her face, but we are shown several times in that episode a shadowy Romulan figure hanging out in the background, watching everything happen. And I don't know that we even heard her voice, but they were planting the seed for a shadowy Romulan figure from that episode. And then we see her in shadow, and I think we hear her speak a few times in Redemption 1. And then we see her face at the end of it. And that's the last image of the season. And then we had to wait over the summer for them to explain who she was.
So I like Denise Crosby. She's not the best actress in the world, but Tasha Yar was not a completely intolerable character, and I think that she was given the short end of the stick when it came to her time on the show and everything. And she cooked up this idea of how to get back on the show, and they went along with it. But the whole idea of Sela, it just doesn't make any sense for her to exist, because especially Scott, you do the same thing that I do. You overthink things. But when you take into account that the events of Star Trek 09 are considered canon, even though they take place in another universe, because in canon, Spock dies in Star Trek Beyond. We don't see it happen, but we get news that he has died.
Mm-hmm.
So that's how this canon character ends, is in those films. The whole idea of Star Trek 09 completely erases the possibility of yesterday's Enterprise. So when you think of it that way, Tasha Yar couldn't die twice, and Picard only remember one of them.
Well, how does Star Trek 09 negate yesterday's Enterprise?
Because because the time travel in that episode created an alternate timeline, and in yesterday's Enterprise, if the Enterprise had come into the future the way that it did, then when it got sent back, it would have got sent back to an alternate timeline. It wouldn't have changed the events of the future. So the fact that she goes back in time, she wouldn't be able to have a child that would wreak havoc in the future.
I think it depends on just what works for the plot. You've said this yourself, Sean. They do time travel different all the time. Every time they do it on Star Trek, it's different.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But
I think the foundationally for this one, unless I'm misunderstanding you, the Star Trek 2009 movie has no bearing on yesterday's Enterprise or
No.
unification at all. Totally unconnected. So, but if you're using that as an example of
the
that
time travel,
travel caused an alternate timeline, and yes, in its way, the Enterprise C moving forward in time. So the removal of the Enterprise C from the Prime timeline created an alternate timeline, and that alternate timeline is where the Enterprise C emerged in the future. But then by going back to the original time, they restored the Prime timeline and they eliminated that alternate timeline. But because of wibbly wobbly timey wimey, the character that being alternate universe or alternate reality Yar, that character did not vanish into thin air when her alternate timeline disappeared, because time is magic. So she stays when everything else about her timeline did not.
Yeah. I just I think the idea of I think Sela's existence is stupid.
I never had a problem with Tasha Yar going back. I love yesterday's Enterprise. It's one of my all-time favorite episodes. I don't have as big a problem with Star Trek's dealing with. Okay, let me rephrase this. I don't like time travel for the most part. It because it is just hand wavy. There is no consistency, and and a lot of times it just turns into a lazy way for the writers to go, we're going to do all of this shit, and then at the end of the episode, it never happened. Yeah.
You're gonna love the next series that we do then.
Oh, I know. Over on the Starbase, we're reviewing Star Trek Voyager, and there was, in the first season, there was an episode where they come across this planet that's just been absolutely burnt to a cinder, and it turns out it was like an allegory for a nuclear accident, because they were using a power system that was dangerously unstable, and then it went. The explosion was so bad that several members of Voyager's crew end up getting sent back in time to when the accident happens, and then ultimately it turns out that the Voyager crew, by being sent back in time, caused this accident to happen. And, spoiler alert for a 25-year-old episode from the first season. Eventually they fix it so that they don't even go to the planet, because they fixed the problem, and then it didn't happen. And because it didn't happen, the planet wasn't blown up, and it was just a normal pre-warp society. And so they left it alone because of the Prime Directive, and nobody remembered it. And that's the kind of crap I hate, because it's hey, what do you mean the last season was a dream kind of thing, but they do it all the time with time travel. But this episode, I liked how the time travel worked. I liked how, that focal point in history of the Enterprise C defending Klingons, even though it was a lost cause. It was a great story, and it was kind of consistent with what we had seen in TOS with the Guardian of Forever. And McCoy went back and screwed this up, but if you guys go back and unscrew it up, everything will be back to normal, and et cetera, et cetera. And then I like Denise Crosby too. I think that she was very poorly treated by the writers. And her career did not go all that well after she left Star Trek, and I don't blame her in any way for wanting to get back on the show. But I just think the character of Sela, the whole storyline of her mother being raped numerous times by her captors is just dark AF, and
especially with the history of that character.
Exactly. And and that's just kind of glossed over. I don't think the character was particularly well written. Granted, I don't think any of the Romulans were particularly well written in TNG. and it just got worse and worse as she went along. And then she was like so blisteringly incompetent. How could she have been, put in charge of this massive, operation to essentially conquer Vulcan?
Was it that massive?
There were
this is one of my. We'll get there. Sure, I'll go in order. But, yeah,
I mean, she can't even notice that a wall in her office is now like 6 feet closer to the door than it was when she left. Or why does she have a goddamn hollow projector in her office to begin with?
Because
she can summon the emergency medical hologram.
Right. Oh boy, yeah, a lot of problems. A lot of problems.
Yeah, Chris, you're referring to the fact that they're gonna try and take over Vulcan with just a couple hundred soldiers, right?
It was 2,000. It was a little over 2,000 soldiers with 3 ships. I don't think you could take over Manhattan with 2,000 soldiers. You're going to take over an entire friggin' planet? And then what are they going to do? Okay, say their plan works perfectly. And they get to Vulcan and they entrench themselves. And she said, by that time we'll be entrenched and reunification will be a fact. Well, no, they will, because there are, 7 billion Vulcans. And they will just roust out the 2,000 of you, arrest you, and send you back to Romulus. The plan is stupid. And it is so low stakes because it's 3 ships. And they're calling it a Romulan invasion force. It's 3 Vulcan ships. 3 salvaged Vulcan ships. It's just the most ridiculous plot ever.
It's better than Red Matter.
Not a high bar.
It just seemed to me like artificial stakes so that they could put the kitchen sink in there. Denise Crosby being the drain plug. Like, okay, we have her back too. I think that if they had kept it, I don't know. I want to say that this is good in the fact that it expanded what we normally see on Next Gen. We got off of the Space Hilton and we went to a space lizard lounge, basically, with the 4-armed piano player and the fat Ferengi.
The whole lounge was just a redress. They just redressed the observation deck of the Enterprise.
Did they? Okay.
Yeah.
So there you go. And we have gold lame napkins, which I guess is nice. But at least it sort of gave you a sense of like an underground. But if Riker is there like fishing for information, why would he go in his commander's uniform? And I guess it was maybe an intimidation factor, but it's not really like, I don't know. I just think it's they tried to give a sense of a bigger universe, maybe like the underbelly of what you don't normally see in the Federation, because this is covert ops. So they have to go like off the radar. They got to sort of go dark with it, but they just used it for bad comedy. And I didn't at the end of the day understand why they needed to go to that bar at all to get that information from the fat Ferengi. I mean, the best part I thought was when they sang the Klingon opera. I thought that was hilarious. So,
my favorite line from the episode is when Sela says, "Excuse me, I'm just finishing up a speech for you, Mr. Spock. I rather enjoy writing. I don't get to do it very often in this job." And Data says, "Perhaps you would be happier in another job." I think that I as I said at the beginning, I do think that this episode belongs in my top 20, but that's mainly because of Nimoy and Mark Leonard. But I also at the same time think that this episode suffered from the fact that they really wanted it to be a 2-parter, and it could have been just one episode. If they had there was several things that didn't have to be there. This plot of the whole thing with Sela could have been changed, and you could have gotten Nimoy into the episode earlier, and it could have just been a one-off episode. But they wanted it to be a 2-parter because it was the 25th anniversary. They had a movie coming up, and they wanted it to be an event. So.
And I noticed on the Amazon, not Amazon, it was Netflix version that I watched. There was also a tribute to Roddenberry at the very beginning of each episode. I guess it was also marking his passing as well.
Yeah, this wasn't the first episode that came out since he died, but I think it was the first episode they filmed after he died. So they put it
Right.
before
So I
this
mean,
episode.
that's what I'm saying. So it was a noble effort, a lot of fan service, but it just, I guess it sounds like I'm getting to final thoughts. So again,
Well, the mind meld with Picard at the end is a touching scene because Spock never melded with Sarek. So in a sense, this was his way of being able to say goodbye to his father. Chris is shaking his head.
I mean, again, you had to have the mind meld because you had to have the nerve pinch because Vulcan. Anything, you had to have the live long and prosper. You had to have, no matter, it was just every Vulcan touchstone they could think of, they had to throw in there. And I found that the mind meld was just like, let's tack that on the end because it will make you feel good. Maybe I didn't see a very logical reason for that to happen because Spock doesn't know Picard. And if Picard offers, I think that Spock might have some hesitation or some reservation. I don't see him taking a mind meld lightly. I don't know. Again, my mileage varies. This episode turned me off because Romulan politics are freaking boring.
Also, if Data was able to do a Vulcan nerve pinch, you would think that he would have done it before now.
Yeah, maybe.
That should just be
press before then.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if people that other than Vulcans are able to do that, which we've seen Picard do it before. So if people that are not Vulcans are able to do that, then it should be a standard move that's taught at the Academy.
Well, okay. The canonicity of the Vulcan nerve pinch being able to be done by other people was established in TOS because I forget the episode. Spock pinches somebody and Kirk just says, I really wish you could teach me that. And Spock goes, I have tried, Captain. So if it was impossible for anyone other than a Vulcan, Spock wouldn't have tried it, wouldn't have tried to teach Kirk to do it.
Yeah.
And I've heard people say that it's a strength issue, and Data could do it because he could muster up enough strength. Where Vulcans have superior strength to humans, humans have a much more difficult time doing it because they can't apply the proper amount of pressure. I never got that. I just figured if you can't do it because you just can't find the right spot.
Yeah.
But listen, it's all headcanon anyway. So
whatever. I only have a couple of trivia things, but Leonard Nimoy had not previously appeared in the show because his asking price was $1 million, which was beyond the budget of the series. So Roddenberry originally wanted Nimoy to be in Encounter at Farpoint instead of DeForest Kelley, and Nimoy wanted $1 million, and Roddenberry's like, that's over the budget. We can't do that. So.
Which of course means that Nimoy didn't want to do it, and so he said, "All right, I don't want to do this," because he was still in the middle of the "I Am Not Spock" years at that point.
Yeah,
and he didn't want to do it, but he was like, "All right, I'm going to give you a figure that I know you're not going to reach. That way, I don't look like I'm the dick saying I'm not going to do it. You're just not going to pay me."
Yeah. Well, since the Star Trek 6 was coming up in a month, and Nimoy was executive producer on that film, he was entitled to a percentage of the profits of the film. He wanted to get as much publicity as possible. So he decided he agreed to do this episode for standard SAG rates, which I think at the time was like maybe $300 or $400 a day, something like that.
For a speaking part, probably more.
Okay. Well,
I'm sure he did just fine even without the million.
Oh yeah. And then the other thing is, I had several things, but we've kind of brought them up as we've gone along. But the four-handed piano player, Amari, is played by Judy M. Durand, and she later went on to perform the voice of the station computer on Star Trek Deep Space Nine.
Huh. Oh. I thought that she was good. She was a bright spot in the episode.
It was clear she was having fun.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
No, who was the bright spot? Was it the actress sitting at the piano, or whoever it was that provided the voice? Because every single frame of that performance is ADR.
Yeah, but you got to imagine they got her back into ADR. You would hope. You would hope.
Well, and I suppose it's
flushing the
possible.
toilet.
For my assumption is that when it's a little bit here and there that's ADR, then they had some bad sound they had to fix. But it's when it's everything. That's an example of like season 3's The Ensigns of Command, where they had someone come in and play the part and they didn't like it, so they had someone else come in and loop every bit of dialogue.
Yeah.
Because not one word comes out of the piano player's mouth that was recorded on the set. And Riker is not looped through all that, so I assume it's not a problem with the set. It makes me think it was a problem with the performance.
Well,
Unless
or
he was,
it could have
talking
just
too
been
quiet, or-
yeah, it could have just been an anomaly of when they were doing her shot. There could have been a sound anomaly going on or something. Because I know I've heard Will Wheaton talk before about how much noise the doors make when they close on the bridge.
Mm-hmm.
And so they always had to be careful to not start talking until after the doors were closed, because if they did, they have to go back in an ADR, because they always had to go back and mute the sound of the doors closing.
Yeah.
So if somebody was talking while that was happening, it would have to go back and be dubbed.
Yeah, if you watch any outtakes, you see doors open in an outtake, you'll hear them every single time. Just rough wood just bouncing off of other planks. Just
yeah.
I didn't know that.
Speaking of outtakes, by the way, there's a new Star Trek intakes. Scott, have you seen it yet? We've got
not
it.
since you sent me a link, and there were 3 new ones when I followed that.
Yeah, and he put out a new one today with Guinan and Beverly. It's great.
Okay, another thing that annoyed me on this, if we're going to get nitpicky, why does the computer sound effects on the Klingon bird of prey sound exactly like the computer sound effects on the Enterprise D, and in I noticed the most in First Contact, but just sort of that obnoxious sort of I don't know. To me, like the sound of the original Enterprise bridge was very soothing. The sounds that are on the next gen bridge are very harsh, so I hear them all the time because they grate on me, and they use the same exact sound effects for the Klingon bridge, which makes no sense to me. And the fact that Data needs Spock to help him break an encryption code. Data's a freaking android with a positronic brain.
That's just because they wanted Data and Spock to have a conversation.
Exactly. But it's just like, one bright spot of the episode was I thought that the Klingon captain that ferried them to the neutral zone was very good. And he was actually really smart, because usually with Klingons, it's just bluster and bravado. And he asked them a question as to, why are we doing it this way? And you expect him to be a dick. And then they explain why they're doing it. And you could see the wheel spinning in his head saying, this is good for the Empire. This is good for me. All right, I'm going to do what they say. It's like he shut himself down. And I liked that part of it. And maybe it's, again, because I was just so disappointed with a lot of the other stuff. These were like little bits that I could cling to.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know.
Y'all have anything else to add before we wrap things up?
It's a golden voice. It's always good to listen to him.
All right.
There was one thing that I thought of earlier when we were talking about Romulans and how they all look the same. Did anyone else find it strange that Spock, one of the most recognizable members of the Federation over the past 100+ years, can walk around the planet Romulus with no ridges,
right?
No prosthesis, nothing on his face to make him look Romulan, just, his usual Spock haircut, which is a little different than a Romulan haircut, and the same ears and the same outfit. And no one realizes, wait a minute, you're not a Romulan, you're a Vulcan. Also, arguably the most recognizable Vulcan in history.
Right. Yeah. I thought of that too. Yeah. It's just, they didn't want to put the prosthetics on Spock. Which
is why he ended up having to go underground, and how they got the surveillance footage in the first place.
Well, that might be why he had to go underground, but then you notice that he spends a hell of a lot of time above ground in these episodes.
Yeah.
It's not like he lives down there.
Yeah. Nimoy was probably just like, I'll do the ears, but that's it.
I think the problem with this episode overall is that, if you read any of the stories of how all of the Star Trek series were put together, they were always under pressure for time. They never had enough time to do everything they wanted to do, or to do things as rightly as they probably could have been. So you've already got this high pressure situation, and then someone says, hey, we've got this movie coming out, we need to tie in this episode to it, throw it together even quicker. And then we've got to work with one of the biggest stars in the Star Trek universe, which means we work around him, not the other way around. And I think while there are moments in this episode that I absolutely love, as we've mentioned, I don't need, I'm not going to go back over them, but I can't argue with anything Chris is saying either. The whole kind of storyline feels really slapdash and thrown together, and it really falls apart in the last act. So there are points in this thing that I would love to see it, like Scott said, just edit it down to one episode. Keep the kind of the spy thing, but severely edit the bar scene to just the important notes, points of it. Could cut down some of the scrapyard scenes, because obviously that was padded out to add just to fill up the episode. The performances were great, and I think in both of those, and so just kind of take out the padding, get rid of the whole goddamn Sela subplot, and just have this whole thing of Spock trying to bring Romulus and Vulcan back together again. And you don't need the whole invasion crap, because it doesn't do anything other than give a reason to have Sela there, which there's no reason for that anyway. I've already made my opinion clear about that.
They expanded on Sela quite a bit in Star Trek Online as well.
Sure.
All right. Well, Rick, let everybody know where they can find you.
Right here in my living room. They won't let me leave.
For at least another couple months.
Another couple of months, yeah. Go to starbasecommand.net, and you can find all of the Infinite Diversity shows, including, by now it should be out, the brand new show, Treknobabble, where my co-host Ellie and I take an aspect of the tech of Star Trek and talk it to death.
All right. Chris, what about you?
As always, you can find me on the Quantum Leap podcast with my wonderful co-hosts Allison Pregler and Matt Dale. You can get us at quantumleappodcast.com. You can also check out my website, deflipside.com, where I do just little thought pieces and book reviews and radio bits and stuff like that. So it's deflipside.com.
All right. And Scott?
Normally, you can find me on the Cosmic Potato Network on a few different shows as a guest, or on my very own show, The Prime Direction, season 3 of which will be starting very soon. The first episode is in the editing bay right now, and episode 2, as of this recording, is being recorded tomorrow. Does that sound familiar? Because I said the exact same thing last episode. Weird how time works, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
To get updates on the Prime Direction and when new episodes are coming out, follow us on Twitter at Prime Direct Pod. If you are interested in being on the show or know someone who wants to be on the show, you can send us an email, primedirectpod@cosmicpotato.com. And if you want to keep up on any of my graphic artwork, which is separate from podcasting most of the time, you can follow me on Twitter at PlanetRise, or visit my website, www.planetrisecreative.com.
All right. That'll do it for this episode. If you want to get in touch with us, then make sure you stay tuned, and we'll let you know how momentarily. And be sure you join the Facebook group, whether you're watching this video on my page or if you're watching it on the Cosmic Potato page. Go to Star Trek All Access on Facebook, join that group, and we'll let you know when we're doing more of these live streams or when episodes of the podcast are coming out. and other such nonsense. I put out memes and stories related to Star Trek and stuff like that all the time. So check that out. And join us in a couple of weeks as we continue our crossover series by reviewing the return of Scotty in the episode Relics. And we'll have a special guest. Star Trek novelist Michael Jan Friedman will be here to review it with us. He wrote the novelization of that episode. And thanks for listening. Bye-bye. And if you're watching the video, then what I just talked about has already happened. That's time travel works.
Now I feel like a fool because I mentioned Michael Jan Friedman in this episode, which is going to come out before the episode where he's going to be there.
No one's going to notice. It's fine.
It doesn't matter. Nobody listens to this shit anyway.
Oh my God, I've never heard you curse.
But the episode is done, right?
Yeah, we're still live, but
we're still live, but the episode is over.
Yeah, the episode is over.
Okay. I pulled a muscle under my jawline in a yawn.
Oh, I saw you yawn and then grab your chin.
Yeah, that was me trying to relax the muscle because my neck muscle here was trying to